New Zealand's recent Prime Minister entered the global cultural zeitgeist after her sudden rise to power in 2017. The world's new, youngest female head of government, Jacinda Ardern, quickly became a favourite of the international mainstream media. However, after an overwhelming victory in the next election, her popularity with New Zealanders fell almost as quickly as her original rise to power. And just a couple of years later,
the appalling Prime Minister of New Zealand, it's the lady with the big teeth who tormented her citizens, has just announced she is leaving office.
I myself spent much of the last 5 years living and working overseas. And one of the main things that I would hear from people would be, hey, you're from New Zealand. You have that great female prime minister, right? Evidently, Jacinda's fall from grace was not as widely covered by the international mainstream media as her ascendancy had been. Being able to explain what exactly led New Zealanders to so strongly reject our great female prime minister was not such an easy thing, given how unreliable the New Zealand mainstream media's reporting had become in that time period. Luckily, I managed to track down one journalist in New Zealand with political expertise and committed to telling the truth, who could help me clarify what exactly Jacinda did as Prime Minister and what were the effects for New Zealand. And what Sean Plunkett had to tell me, I could not believe what I was hearing. This is the Not Afraid to Share Your Opinions podcast. I wanted to start with one interesting point, which is that Jacinda Ardern is kind of like the original Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris, as you know, was swapped in as the candidate of the Democrats for the latest election 3.5 months before the election, which is pretty unprecedented.
And with Ardern, it was 6 or 7 weeks.
Yeah, so that's even much more. That's so much more quickly. And she didn't win the party votes. She won 36%, but she did form a government. So I was wondering, maybe as a first question, what exactly happened there? Do you know, in terms of both the switch out and in terms of her forming a government?
Well, it's kind of look. It's kind of in the age of the internet. That's ancient friggin' history. Clearly, Little wasn't going to win, and they needed a push. I was actually working for the top party. My short time in politics, I was communications and media director of the top party. And we were on track to get over 5% until the day Jacinda announced, and she sucked every swinging middle ground female voter out of the room. So it was a massive impact, and that's politics. There was nothing illegal about it. And then Winston, of course, did the dirty on all his voters and went with her. And that's part of history.
For anyone who doesn't know, Winston Peters is kind of like the perennial figure in New Zealand politics who's always been around, and I guess he leads potentially the third biggest party in New Zealand sometimes.
Well, potentially the biggest, potentially the second biggest. That's who Winston is. He's a survivor.
And why did he go with Jacinda in that election? Do you know?
You would have to ask him. And, they didn't get back in next time. It was seen as a betrayal.
Okay. And
I think because actually, with that generation of National Party people, there was still some bad blood about Winston.
Okay. So his relationships weren't so good with that National Party.
And look, Bill English won that election. He got more votes than anyone else, but he couldn't do the coalition deal. Yeah. It was really interesting.
Shows how important relationships are to politics alongside policy.
Right.
So then, like, I guess to summarize that, Jacinda really, you think, won in a way that her predecessor couldn't, the guy she replaced.
Yeah, he wasn't getting any cut through. And,
right.
We didn't have, God, did we have a woman standing as leader of party? We didn't. That election, and female voters were somewhat disengaged. So smart politics. Nothing illegal about it. That's what happens. And she got the votes. She didn't, bribe anyone or, she was just she got enough votes to do a deal with Winston.
She did. And then fast forwarding 3 years, she didn't need Winston. She was re-elected in a landslide. She won 50.01% of the party vote.
Yeah,
and she formed an outright majority. I was overseas at that time, but I have the impression in retrospect that a lot of the reason why she won was kind of almost a double down on what you said for her first win. It was more her appeal to certain demographics and also her symbolic leadership during COVID. And because there was this narrative that New Zealand was handling COVID at that time better than other countries.
Oh, absolutely. And that has got to, I don't think you can actually take that election and apply any rules to it. It was such a bizarre time in our history, and that's why it delivered such a bizarre result. I think the last thing people wanted was change. I think the country was screaming to get back to normal, and changing the government out when we all just want to get back to normal was not going to do that. So a completely isolated election in terms of trend or learning anything from it, to be honest. And I got to say, I picked that weeks beforehand. I can remember going up to moderate a leaders thing. And the only person close to Jacinda in terms of on the stump presence was Winston, but he was out of favour. And I can remember turning around to someone and saying, she's going to win a absolute majority. She is just on top of her game. And as a politician, you can recognise when a politician is in the right retail space, and she was.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if this would account for very much at all, but I've heard that some people voted for her because she was going to win anyway, and they didn't want any coalition parties like the Greens to have an influence on her government.
Oh, yeah. Oh, look, I haven't seen any research on that, but as I say, that's possible.
Yeah. All right. Well, then she won that outright majority, and I think, I don't know how soon this happened, but 2021 to 22, her popularity just kind of, I guess it plummeted. I don't know if you'd say that, but things started to go downhill, and then she resigned 2 years later in January 2023. Yeah. So
yeah.
What went so wrong in her second term?
I think the middle New Zealand got its mojo back, and the level of same thing happened to Helen Clark, actually. The level of fawning sycophancy from the Liberal left just started to turn even neutral people's stomachs. They were thoroughly sick of the beatification of Jacinda Ardern, and a number of issues started to rise to the fore. Freedom of speech issues. The true radical nature of that Labour administration in relation to issues of race in New Zealand started to become very, very clear. Their radical agenda on gender and sexuality issues became clear. And suddenly people started to feel very uncomfortable about the government. And she was most definitely, because of her popularity, what you identified the government as was they were inseparable. And then the internet and got onto her, and she got pretty badly trolled, even by New Zealand standards. And she could read the polling. The internal party polling was that it reached a point where her unpopularity was then having a negative impact on Labour. And as with Andrew Little, they made a calculated decision that she'd leave to improve the chances of the party. And I presume by then she had already teed up her sinecure at Harvard and had her seat on the international gravy train.
Do you think she was that it was like a sort of a decision that she made, or was it sort of one that she accepted from the party?
I am not privileged to the inner workings of the Labour Party management or caucus, but I imagine, as good old Marxists, they would have got together and had a meeting behind closed doors and come up with a strategy.
Okay.
I don't think anyone was going to challenge her. It's sort of like Little. Little threw himself on his own sword, and good old Marxists, it's always for the good of the party, as long as the party takes care of the good of me.
Well, I think I was not following New Zealand politics that closely at that time, but I think that the impression I got, and this could be totally off, is that it really kind of got to her, the negativity
Oh no, she
personally.
said it didn't. She specifically came out and said it wasn't the trolls. I can only take her at her word.
True, fair point.
She said it repeatedly, despite the fact that the lefty media, oh, it's terrible, she's been hounded from office. Bullshit. And she said as much. I do know that, I've seen some pretty appalling things, and I've never bought into the I don't like Jacinda thing. I think the hatred that's shown for her is completely irrational and horribly tribal. But it was just a political calculation. And they thought they had a better shot with Hitkins. But what they didn't do was listen to the people and realize it was their whole attitude on a whole range of issues that people were thoroughly sick of. And changing the front person didn't change the decline in the party's fortunes.
So if the polling was better, you think she would have stayed in spite of everything? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting. The reason I had that idea was that her rhetoric still, from what I've seen, is a lot about feelings and about empathy, and she strikes me as quite a sensitive person in a way that other politicians may not be.
Oh, yeah, a sensitive person. He stood up at Harvard and said free speech was hate speech and declared war on freedom of speech. Oh, that's real empathetic. Said anyone who criticised her was an incel sitting in their mother's basement in a superhero uniform. Oh, incredibly kind, sharing, open and tolerant. Wouldn't talk to media she didn't like. Incredibly kind. It was bullshit.
In my mind, though, that kind of has a link, because I think that the people who who want to suppress speech the most are the people who kind of can't take it, a lot of them, because they don't want the discomfort of someone saying something critical to them. They'd prefer just that person wouldn't be able to say that thing.
Yeah, that's right. All you do is you bottle it up, and we see now globally that the emperor of kindness had no clothes.
Yeah.
Quite obviously, it's a global trend. Everyone said that was all bullshit, and we knew it. We were just too afraid to say it in case we got cancelled by the lefties.
Yeah.
And it's quite remarkable what Trump is doing and the impact it is having on freedom of speech, and people who have felt cowed by cancel culture around the world are saying, nah, we're going to say what we think. Incredibly positive.
Okay, so in regards, like looking back, I know that there are still people who support Jacinda, who remember her fondly, who
Oh, there are still people who support Helen Clark who remember her fondly.
True. So I was wondering, do you know what like the rational argument for Jacinda was a good leader? Is there one? What do these people say, aside from any ideological or emotional commitment to her that they might have?
No,
is there like a
and
case
look,
that
I
they
don't
make?
spend a lot of time talking to people. Not a lot of people come up to me in the street and tell me how wonderful they think Jacinda is. So I don't really have a frame of reference for that. I mean, look, it was the kind of strident feminist Me Tooers just miss her because they were completely culturally dominant for a while. They dominated the political and the cultural battlefield for some time, and I guess all they long for now is the glory days when all the white man had to do was be, and that was enough reason to call him a misogynistic rapist. And I think that all it is just...
It's basically tribal then. The like
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And all around the world. And she was part of, Macron, Trudeau. It was a great global, liberal, active madness and stupidity for 5 or 6 years. And in a strange way, though I'm not a COVID cooker, that did create the environment for some of the worst ideas of that political cabal to be put into practice.
Yeah, that's true. it was
you
kind of
know.
an opportunity for those authoritarian kind of impulses to come out
Well, yeah,
in the
yeah.
in the
They were the
idea of keeping
fascists,
people safe.
absolutely. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But the idea of cancellation, of codifying cancellation, of having outfits that would certify that you were inclusive in your business, and if you didn't pay them their money for their tick or their approval, no one would do business with you. They codified cancel culture. They codified the witch hunt into the very
Mm.
fabric of government and commerce. And they tried to do it around the world. And what's happening right now, led by Elon Musk, is that common people are rolling that bullshit back around the globe.
Do you have much faith that that's going to like spill into New Zealand? Because I don't really.
It kind of is, and there has been some progress in this. But what we've got, and I talked about it actually on the radio this morning, or sorry, on the internet this morning. Um, we have a government, or we have a leading coalition partner that is scared of saying it's not like Jacinda Ardern. Luxon is just gutless. And the thing that is making the difference in America is that Trump is saying what everyone's thinking out loud. That this was bullshit, that transgenderism was bullshit, that DEI was bullshit, that climate change is bullshit. And he's saying every time they change it or they come for US aid and they do something, they say, and that's what we promised you and that's what we're doing. And Luxon won't do that because he's still under the absolute misconception that the tribal feminazis of cancel culture will ever think about voting for him. He still thinks he can win them over by being Mr. Vanilla,
Yeah.
and he can't.
Yeah. I have the exact same impression. It seems as though he's kind of, when it comes to any contentious issue, he's just searching for the opinion that he can say that's going to not piss off the most amount of people.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
fair?
And what's happening increasingly in New Zealand is those who voted for change, and I think this government is achieving change, but it's not telling people it is because it's kind of embarrassed at the things it's doing because it's, I think, national at its very core has turned a bit woke, you know? And I think people are now turning, as in Britain, when you look at the rise of the Reform Party, right? People are turning to ACT in New Zealand First as better embodying the spirit of change that they want. And I think National's in incredible trouble if it doesn't listen to that.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen it in England,
And
as
it
you said.
doesn't have an alternate. It doesn't have an alternative leader to Luxon, who has all the charisma of, you know, the guy Andy Millman from The Office. The only person who could possibly do this and embody the spirit of change is, I believe, Judith Collins.
Do you see that happening? Do you see her coming?
I wouldn't put anything past Judith.
Interesting. Interesting. Although isn't she a little bit kind of, I mean, I really don't know much about her, but I have read that she considers herself a feminist, and I'm not sure if she would be standing up to some of that stuff
in the
same
best
way.
in the best old-fashioned meaning of the word, is that women are just as good as men, but they're women. And what's wrong with that? But she's not feminist, all men are rapists. She's not feminist, there are 15 different genders. She's second wave feminist, not third, fourth, or fifth.
Do you think she might also suffer, though, from a problem like an Andrew Little kind of problem, like an image kind of problem? Can she win over voters, the hearts and minds?
Well, it depends where the middle ground is. I think the middle ground's shifting, and she might. I'm just saying, I would speculate she's the only person that could take over and be credible. And I mean, I think the National Party stocks are falling with middle New Zealanders and their traditional voters, and I would expect ACT or New Zealand First to push them into being a very much a three-way coalition with no dominant partner, or indeed National becomes, fades from significance as one of the two big parties in New Zealand.
Well, if that happens, they will have done it to themselves, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. And he won't take a position on things like climate change.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
it's pretty clear what's happening to the Paris Accord and all that bullshit. And we look like we're going to be the last bloody cab off the rank.
Sad. Back to Ardern, I want to
Mm.
get some more questions in about her. So could you, so people kind of turned on her. I can say what I didn't like, and at that time I wasn't that into New Zealand politics, and I was overseas. But I did. The reason why
Yeah.
I actually voted for her in that 2020 election and regretted it subsequently when I saw a few videos of press conferences and interviews that she'd done. Her attitude towards the people who were criticizing her COVID policies, just the dismissiveness and shutting down press conferences. In one video I saw, I think it's quite a famous video where she says she's only going to take questions from accredited media.
Yeah, but they bought
Um,
off, don't forget, they bought off the media. They paid off the
mm,
media. They paid off the
uh,
media. That was all, part of the problem.
oh, I'm not aware of that. What happened there?
Well, we were spending hundreds of millions of dollars to keep media companies afloat during COVID. And there'd been a secret, Willie Jackson had set up a way of subsidizing media companies to do news if they agreed to follow government policy on things like the Treaty of Waitangi. Our mainstream media basically sold their impartiality to the government of the day.
Mm,
And the line between the state and the fourth estate became very, very blurred. That's why the platform exists.
okay. Well, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that. Like I knew that, for example, One News and other companies, they're state media. Like they take money from they're funded
Yeah.
by the government, right? Um, but you're saying there was like another
Everyone,
situation.
well, I didn't. My outfit doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a thing called the Public Interest Journalism Fund. There was New
Mm,
Zealand On Air. There was the Local Democracy Reporting Fund. And you got the money if you agreed to run your company in accordance with the treaties of the Principle of Waitangi that you couldn't find written down anywhere.
yeah.
And you had Maori-centric hiring policies and you were rainbow tick friendly and all the rest of it.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Okay, I had no idea about that.
okay. And this is what the platform was built off the back of, that we thought that was bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah. Yeah.
why public trust in mainstream media in New Zealand, since the time of Ardern, has fallen faster than any comparable democracy in the world.
I have seen that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. I don't think people know about this, Sean.
Well, they haven't been listening to the platform then, because we've been banging on about it for 3 years.
Can you give a few more details to paint a picture on what exactly that was? It like so it was a government organization that set up a sort of a fund
Yeah, it was
that directly.
administered through New Zealand On Air and the Public Interest Journalism Fund through the Minister of Broadcasting. And you'd apply for money just to run your business or to make programs. And the programs would have to sit with a criteria. And there were a whole bunch of government appointments, politically correct people who decide if that documentary or that program was culturally safe. And you could only access the fund if you signed a contract with the government that you would run your business in accordance with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi as defined by the government. Or you wouldn't get the money, and if you broke that rule, you had to give the money back. Hundreds of millions of dollars was dispersed in this way.
Wow. From what years was this taking place?
It started about 2020, I think, maybe 2019.
Okay.
And National have put a stop to it. But now all the media organisations, Radio New Zealand's still funded, and New Zealand On Air is still giving out millions of dollars to its friends to be doing woke shit. So we haven't got rid of it yet. But now, of course, they're all running off, and Labor were going to tax Google and Facebook off their advertising revenue so they could keep handing out the money to their mates in mainstream media. But National have said that's a dumb idea.
Okay. So that's basically a situation where elite people in the government have control over the media, is it
Yep,
not? What the hell?
that's been happening in New Zealand for 6 years.
What the
We
hell?
have Television New Zealand is openly advocating for a separate Maori government. Its political reporter is a self-confessed Maori activist. Three News is full of woke mofos. That's why they kind of went out of business and reconstituted. Our mainstream media is a disgrace. They are political activists who have sucked at the public tit for years. And even when their audience and their public turn them off, and they just turn off the comment section
Yeah.
and will not engage when people say, we are sick and tired of you propagandizing us.
Mm. And it seems as though like a lot of the older generation actually aware in some ways of, like, I've seen One News since I've been back a few times, and you know, like I watched it with my parents, and they know, like they watch it and they're like, oh, this is so bullshit, this is so skewed, but they still watch it because I think a lot of the older generation are kind of like,
Oh, yeah,
One News is
because
what
they're
they know.
programmed for it. And that's a bit of a
Yeah,
challenge, but,
yeah.
and that's what I hope the platform will be one day. It will be big enough to say we are the new thing. But the way we consume news is changing, and it's a long road.
Hmm.
But it's all about the principle of telling the truth, which our media
Yeah.
haven't been.
Yeah, that's in really short supply at the
Yeah.
moment. Um,
Hmm.
okay, so back to back to Jacinda. What would you say? Could you clarify, like, what would be the top three maybe biggest criticisms of her? What did she do?
Oh,
That
look.
was she behind this, for example? Was she behind this?
Yep. Yep. She was certainly behind cancel culture. She never appeared on the platform when she was Prime Minister. She played favourites. She never understood the dignity and the gravitas of the office of Prime Minister.
Mm,
She misused it to get her friends who were in the dub and dance scene in during COVID. And I don't think she had any real idea of what it meant in a sense of mana to be the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
hmm.
That would be my biggest personal criticism. I don't have much else against Jacinda. I think she was largely doing the bidding of, she was part of a groupthink organization. And she was like the next generation Helen Clark, or she did what Helen told her. I mean, Helen Clark still, in the left, still holds an incredible amount of sway. So I think Jacinda was just the salesperson.
Mm.
And it wasn't, and to think that she ran it, all the madness, not true. This was about the ideological madness of the left, and Jacinda Ardern alone is not responsible for that.
Something that really disturbed me was that famous video, that single source of truth video.
Yeah,
Like that is straight out of George Orwell,
yeah,
saying that you can
yeah,
only trust the government, and anything else
yeah,
you should disregard
yeah,
if you hear it.
yeah.
It's pretty unbelievable. Like,
Well, it's not unbelievable. Politicians say, I've seen other politicians say things just as bad. And the only thing that makes it so terrible is that because of social media, you've seen it over and over and over again, right? Now, people would say bad things like that 20 or 30 years ago. It'd be on TV once, and if you didn't have a video recorder, that was it. You see, things didn't get resonance through social media the way they do, and that's changed the entire dynamic of politics and how people feel about it, because we're constructing and curating our own friggin' echo chambers, which often are bullshit. I'm constantly aware of this, that I've got to get out more or get away more from media and remember that everything I get bombarded with isn't what other people are getting bombarded with,
mm,
right? I do think we have, as much as many in the world now have Trump derangement syndrome, I think there are a fair few people who have got Jacinda derangement syndrome. And that is that everything ever bad, that she's got horns growing out her head. She isn't. She was a young woman who, for certain reasons, became Prime Minister of New Zealand at a very weird time, and she did some bad shit. But, so what?
You more view her as part of a movement, not like someone who was,
Oh yeah, the whole crazy movement of
yeah.
of you know basically the new fascism of the left,
Mm,
cancel culture, identitarian politics, critical race theory, decolonization. These are absolutely mad ideas that have infected deep into New Zealand's psyche, deep into our judiciary, into statutory bodies. And what I'm saying, this is the thing that Luxon doesn't get. People voted finally in frustration to get rid of that, and he won't even acknowledge that it was a problem
mm,
because he's too effing woke.
yeah. That kind of gives me the idea, yeah, that she was kind of just an agent of this push that people are now reacting against, and that
Hmm.
she specifically hasn't really
Yeah.
personally damaged the country, for example, but this movement that she was an agent of has kind of damaged the
No,
country in many ways.
and she's the focus for the dissatisfaction,
Right. Yeah. Okay.
right? You
That
look at
makes
the
sense.
parliamentary protest, for example. Trevor Mallard's behaviour during that protest was far worse than his. But what does he get? He gets to be ambassador to Ireland, High Commissioner to Ireland, despite the fact that Winston David Seymour said they'd recall him. They didn't. So it's not all down to Jacinda.
That's really interesting. Um, so, like, uh, maybe to like put a bow on this, for me, it seems like her story is kind of one about someone who was idealistic and a bit naive, perhaps, and that her ideas and maybe the ideas of this movement in general, they sound nice, but they don't scale well into public policy. Like, for example, the soft on crime thing, it sounds really good, and it's really good, nice to think that if everyone was just nice to criminals, then there wouldn't be any crime.
That wasn't the policy. The policy was good old Marxist philosophy, feed people bullshit, exercise control. And there was nothing original about what she did. It is the cycle of politics in human history. I don't think it had anything with kindness or soft on crime. It was like gets, perpetrated on voters and people all around the world. It was just good old fashioned Marxism. They were just looking for a way to exercise control, tell everyone what to think, propagandize them through a state-owned media. Nothing to see here, really. And look, the thing is, I think um, people are very quick to try and it's a bit like Hitler, though I don't want to get into Godwin's law. Like, the only problem with the Nazis was Hitler. With the Germans, it was just all Hitler's fault. Well, it wasn't. It
Mm.
was Germany's fault. It was the world powers' fault for the Treaty of Versailles. Um, it is very simplistic for us to say it was all because Jacinda Ardern was so bad and so evil that she fucked everything up. No, it takes a village to fuck a village up.
Okay. Um, so, what then is the role of individual personalities in politics? Like, is it all just movements, or do you think that personalities have a role here, or does it depend on the person or on the
It
situation?
depends entirely on the person, and it's quite, it's a movable and variable feast. And look, none of them are perfect. None of us are perfect. But I just am not into deep. I mean, the last politician to be demonized to the extent in New Zealand that Jacinda was Rob Muldoon.
Hmm.
And the last person to be beatified to the extent she was probably Longy,
Hmm.
though Helen Clark came close. At least since then, the National Party have pretty well had prime ministers void of any sparkling personality. You can never accuse, for instance, Chris Luxon of running a cult of personality because he doesn't have one to run the cult with. Um, Jacinda kind of did But I'd also say that often cults of personality are projected onto people without them creating it. Myth and image building is done by others, not the person concerned.
Yeah. I mean, she kind of was able to dance a little bit with it, like the keffiyeh wearing stuff. And
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't know why people are still so freaking obsessed with her. She's running some woke course at Harvard.
so she's actually teaching at Harvard now.
Yep. She got a nice little sinecure teaching something about be kind communications, obviously made up for her by all her friends in the international community. And she's just had a movie that her hubby made. Thank God no public money went into that. That won a thing at Sundance. And she's charging $250,000 on the speaking certificate every time she pops up. So she's all good, you know. And her mum is seeing a shrink because her mum's so traumatized by the trolling in New Zealand.
Oh wow.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess it's a pretty rough game, eh?
Yep.
So how can if New Zealand has made the wrong decision in electing her twice, what's the lesson that people should learn from that whole Jacinda experience, Labour Party experience?
I'm not sure you can vote more carefully. You know, it's a crapshoot, Alex. People will make the same decisions over and over again. They always do.
It's a bit depressing thought.
No, just life. As Shakespeare said, it's a tragedy or a comedy. Just depends how you play it.
Something you said a couple of times is that like the Labour Party, you've associated them with Marxism, and I don't think that that's how most New Zealanders see it. And I'd be interested to like.
Well, they had
hear
that. They had to become the right wing '84. Then they had the massive sort of schism, and they're back to kind of. Well, they're kind of post-Marxist now, aren't they? They're identitarian.
Mm.
They're uber feminist, uber minority, uber Black Lives Matter. They're a virtue signaling bunch of wankers, really.
Mm. Ideologically captured.
Yeah. And driven.
Yeah, but they're still going on the fumes of their past reputation. Like so many people just vote for them. Well, a lot of people just vote for them because they're Labour voters. They've always been Labour voters,
Yep.
and they think,
and 82% of New Zealanders, well, certainly in 2017, no, it was higher than that. 87% of New Zealanders in the 2017 election, we did some research on this, would never change the way they vote their whole lives.
yeah,
Because working for AT, we figured, so we're only really dealing with 17% of the voters. And we need to get 5%.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's changing. I think we are living in an era where people are more willing to abandon, particularly under MMP, abandon traditional voting patterns. I don't think, with the speed of information and the speed that narratives changed and are shaped, I don't think that idea of, I'm a Labour man or I'm a national through and through, I think those days are gone or are rapidly evaporating.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, a lot of people voted for ACT last time who had never voted for ACT before, or probably never even considered it.
Yeah.
And regarding the Green Party and their like how they play into this, for anyone who doesn't know, they're kind of like, I mean, I don't really like to use left and right anymore because I don't know that it does it justice, but they're kind of like the even further left party than Labour in New Zealand. They gained.
No, they're the real
votes.
kooks. They are the real climate change cookers. Yeah.
They gained even more votes in the last election, the same as ACT. It was very, very close, them and ACT in terms of, and I have the idea that they took votes away from Labour. Do you think that that's true?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have the idea that, especially Wellington, a lot of communities in Wellington, but a lot of areas around the country, but mostly Wellington, is kind of drifting further and further left. And people are kind of thinking, well, if Labour are kind of advocating the same thing as the Greens, I may as well just vote for the Greens.
No, the problem with Labour and the Greens have is for any of them to get in, they need the Maori Party, and the Maori Party scares shite even out of left voters. The best thing that could happen to Labour and the Greens if they killed the Maori Party. Then they'd have a chance. But the Maori Party are the friends of the centre-right. They make Labour and the left unelectable.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember watching the minor parties debate before the last election, and it really just seemed like the representative from the Maori Party and from the Green Party, they just seemed to be almost from the same party. They were agreeing with each other on everything.
Oh, yeah.
And at one point, they even high-fived, during the debate.
Yeah.
So you think that the Labour Party, if they... I have the idea that maybe it would be smart for them to kind of try and distinguish themselves from the Greens a bit politically, because if they're just appealing...
Well, they don't have a whole lot of shoplifters. They don't wear the Palestinian tea towel as often as the Green Party do. They've probably got, I don't know, more... Yeah, look, I think you can define them, but the Green Party can push the boat out on some issues that Labour don't, but they're pretty indistinguishable, really. That's their business, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've basically asked all the questions I wanted. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about?
No, that's fine. It was nice talking to you, Alex.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah. Thanks a lot for agreeing to do this. And so that's Sean Plunkett. You can check him out at theplatform.kiwi and on X at Sean Plunkett.
Download the app. Become a Platform Plus member.
Download the app. You heard it here. Thanks again, Sean. Thanks very much for your expertise.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.